Coming up on Network Africa today, United Nations says Niger Junta plan to charge ousted President Mohamed Bazoum for treason and is very worrying. Man who murdered former South Africa's First Lady to be released on parole at the end of August. Plus, Ethiopia Lower House approves state of emergency declared by the federal government over violence in Amhara region. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Anne Mwawadu. We begin with the United Nations concern over the treason charges the junta in Niger has announced against the ousted President Mohamed Bazoum. Well, according to the United Nations spokesperson, Stephane Dujarric, an attempt by Niger's junta to bring charges of high treason against democratically elected President Bazoum is very worrying. Mr. Dujarric also expressed concern over the state of being, the health and the safety of the president and his family.
Very worrying declaration. We remain extremely concerned about the state of being, the health and safety of the president and his family. And again, we call for his immediate and unconditional release. And his reinstatement as head of state, of course. Well, on the political end, as you know, our special envoy, our special representative for West Africa, Mr. Shimao, was in Abuja. He continues to work very closely with ECOWAS and the AU. It's very important that the UN, the regional organizations, sub-regional organizations present a united front, which we would hope will move to the reversal of the situation.
Well, also, the U.S. State Department says it is incredibly dismayed about the reports of a possible persecution against Niger's ousted president, Mohamed Bazoum. The military junta that seized power in Niger in a coup last month has said it will prosecute Bazoum for high treason over his exchanges with foreign heads of state and international organizations. The coup leaders have imprisoned Bazoum and dissolved the elected government, drawing condemnation from global powers and West Africa's regional bloc ECOWAS, which decided last week to assemble a standby military force that could intervene to reinstate Mr. Bazoum.
We are incredibly dismayed by the reports that President Bazoum's unjust detention has gone an even step further, and now that the CNSP is threatening prosecution. This action is completely unwarranted and unjustified, and candidly, it will not contribute to a peaceful resolution of this crisis. It is a further affront, in our opinion, to democracy and justice and to the respect of the rule of law. Our ECOWAS has shown immense leadership throughout this crisis, and the United States has appreciated their work and leadership as well as the work and leadership of the African Union throughout this crisis. As you said, ECOWAS has been also very clear and very clear publicly that military intervention should be a last resort, something that we agree with, and we continue to be focused on finding a diplomatic solution and are in close contact with ECOWAS and their leadership on this.
The former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, is advocating for an end to military and civilian coup in democratic governance across the West African sub-region. Professor Akinyemi explains that there is need to create a democratic charter where anti-democratic acts will be identified and appropriate sanctions meted upon military and civilian coup plotters. He also spoke on our political program, Politics Today.
Let us have a charter of democracy, a charter of democracy, where we will identify anti-democratic acts and where we will then identify the sanctions against sitting governments that seek to derail the democracy of their own countries. And the same kind of sanctions which you then table against military coupists, you also table against civilian coupists. there's something that has now crept into the language of the political scientists, and that is civilian coups. This is when you have a sitting president who manipulates the constitution, his own constitution. He manipulates it for term elongation. There are even some who scrap the concept of term limitation completely. How do we activate a charter for democracy? Is by arguing for it, by civil society, by the media, pointing out that the greatest and easiest cause of coups in Africa is civilian anti-democratic behavior. Diplomacy is one of these special areas where several different keys will open the door. Doors have creaked open, and I think we should be exploiting several doors being creaked open to keep dialogue on the table.
In the meantime, Niger's coup leaders have recalled their country's ambassador in Côte d'Ivoire. They say the comments by the Ivorian president had amounted to praising armed action against them. Alassane Ouattara had spoken of his determination to see Niger's democratically elected leader, Mohamed Bazoum, reinstated on his return from a regional summit last week. He had also said a military operation to restore democracy in Niger should start as soon as possible, with his country contributing between 850 and 1,100 troops alongside Nigeria and Benin Republic. The West African Regional Bloc ECOWAS has reaffirmed its preference for a diplomatic resolution, but says that military intervention remains on the table. But the bloc said it was shocked that the coup leaders had decided to pursue prosecution against Mr. Bazoum for high treason. Well, while Nigeria, Benin and Côte d'Ivoire are supporting a military intervention in Niger, Ghana appears to be against it. Ghanaian opposition lawmakers are raising alarm regarding the proposed ECOWAS initiative aimed at reinstating constitutional order within the nation. Lawmakers from the opposition are now asking President Nana Akufo-Addo of Ghana to immediately hold all preparation towards deploying Ghanaian soldiers for this endeavor. Members of the minority group and party in Ghana's parliament are advocating for diplomacy and constructive dialogue as the preferred avenues for this resolution. For minority lawmakers in Ghana, they are maintaining that the nation's limited resources shall be channeled towards addressing the country's economic struggles, especially in the wake of a $3 billion, that's about £2.4 billion, International Monetary Fund bailout. They are now contending that Ghana should avoid becoming embroiled in a proxy geopolitical confrontation. And joining me now is Professor David Awurawo, professor and head of the Department of Historic and Strategic Studies in the University of Lagos. He joins me virtually from Akoka, Lagos. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us on Network Africa.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Let's begin with your thoughts on the resolution made by the West African bloc. I mean, ECOWAS is already deploying an option available, which perhaps means the use of standby military force. They say that is still on the table. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, in international diplomacy, getting prepared, getting some military standby, side-by-side diplomatic engagement is always a boost. It always enhances diplomacy. But what ECOWAS should not do is to contemplate actually using the military to intervene in Niger. The issues in Niger are too complicated and intricate for ECOWAS to carry out military intervention in that country. It will just attract all sorts of countries to West Africa to come and fight, and West Africa will become a theater of war. So to the extent that the standby force is just to aid diplomatic engagement, that is fine. But anything beyond that, is not something we have advised. One, these countries who want to intervene, they are poor countries, including Nigeria. Funds they will have, maybe $3 billion, $5 billion, it should be better utilized to, enhance development in these various countries, and not, engagement in war. I also recall that Nigeria has refugees in Niger. Would they go and start fighting their own people in Niger? And of course, the links between Niger and Nigeria, Sokoto, Kano, Jigawa, and all the other, virtually all the countries of the extreme north, border Niger one way or the other. You have people whose families are here and families are on the other side. So the standby force, well, the only sense it makes to me is for it to enhance diplomacy and not for actual invasion of Niger to restore democratic. We all condemn military coup, but of course, when you want to act, you put all the cards on the table and take the best option. And I say categorically, practically, that military intervention will be a disaster.
Now, lawmakers in Ghana are already demanding the president to stop all preparatory mobilization towards deploying Ghanaian soldiers. But with the coup leaders agreeing to hold dialogue with ECOWAS, do you think that the military action can be taken off the table?
It can be if the issues are taken off the radar of zero sum. Right now, it's a zero-sum game. What ECOWAS wants is what the leaders of the coup do not want. So the gain of one is the loss of the other. The ECOWAS says, restore the deposed president. The coup leaders are saying that will never happen. There has to be something in between. And if you ask me, that something in between is that ECOWAS should not insist on the reinstatement of Bazoum. They should rather negotiate so that Bazoum can be released safely along with his family members, and also for a quick transition to civilian government. That is the middle position between the position that ECOWAS is holding now and that the leaders of the coup are holding.
And talking about the safety of Mr. Bazoum, I mean, the coup leaders are already saying that they have been gathering evidence against the ousted leader, and they even plan to charge him for high treason and undermining national security. This move, the US and the UN have already condemned. Do you see this as worrisome as well? Or what do you make of this, and what do you think should be done in this whole instance?
Well, it is concerning. The leaders of the coup need to be reasonable. That is uncalled for, to say they want to charge him for treason. When negotiations start, that is the first thing that ECOWAS leaders should insist on, that they should drop any charges against him, treason and all that, and they should try to see that they secure his release safely. You recall that a few days ago, when the standby force, when the decision was taken by ECOWAS leaders to put in place the standby force, the coup leaders were even talking about killing the deposed president. So the safety of Bazoum should be uppermost on the minds of ECOWAS leaders. So when the leaders of the coup, come for negotiation, that is the first thing they should insist on. They must drop all these charges against Bazoum, and they must guarantee his safety. They should, ensure that he's released very quickly. But of course, they also must grant concession, and that concession will be that a transition to civilian rule that will take place expeditiously will have to be negotiated, not insisting that Bazoum must be reinstated.
And finally, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Guinea have all been currently suspended from ECOWAS following the coups they have had in recent years. And now Niger. How can military takeovers be stopped in Africa, at least?
Well, military takeover can be reduced to the barest minimum when civilians themselves, they govern well. If you check all these countries where there has been military coups, we've had the civilians not having really done well. They haven't been able to lift the standard of living of their people. Poverty is rife. Many of them, just like Professor Bolaji Akinwumi said, some of them try to elongate their tenure. They try to change the constitution to remain in power longer than necessary. All of these things have to stop, so that the same way we are condemning military coups, those civilian coups, so to speak, will also be condemned. When all of these things are done, I mean, the civilians stick to the democratic principles in their governance and focus on addressing the real needs of their people and lifting the quality of life of their people, schools will be reduced to the barest minimum. So these are things that we need to, and ECOWAS too, and by extension AU needs to be more vigorous in insisting on genuine democratic governance.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor David Awarawo. Thank you for your time on Network Africa. Professor is the head of Department of History and Strategic Studies in UNILAG. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so very much.
And just in a moment after the break, the 43-year-old contemporary African photography winner puts personal Mozambican history in the spotlight. We'll bring you the details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. At least 5 Tunisian migrants have been found dead and 7 other people are missing after a makeshift boat left the coast of Sfax in central eastern Tunisia sank. Officials are saying it was a wooden boat with 35 people, mostly Tunisians, on it, including women and children. The boat is said to have capsized shortly after its departure, and 23 people were rescued. That's Tunisia's second city. Sfax has since the beginning of the year become the epicenter of attempts to illegally cross the Mediterranean from the Tunisian coast, located at the closest point less than 130 kilometers from the island, Italian from Lampedusa. The Sfax court has now opened an investigation to determine the cause of the accident. The man who murdered South Africa's former First Lady, Marieke de Klerk, is set to be released on parole at the end of August. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder and another life term for robbery with aggravating circumstances in May 2003. 20 years on, according to the prison's department spokesperson, he has since been considered for parole placement, having served the minimum required time, and will be admitted into the system of community corrections. Leanda Mboniswa, who was 21 years old when he committed that crime, worked as a security guard at the former First Lady's apartment block. A 64-year-old who was stabbed and strangled in her Cape Town home in December 2001. Mboniswa also stole a mobile phone, gold watch, and money, then was arrested 2 days after the crime. Marieke de Klerk was South Africa's First Lady between 1989 and 1994. Her husband, Frederick William de Klerk, was the country's last president under apartheid rule, and their marriage ended in 1996. Over in Ethiopia, where the House of Representatives has voted in favor of the state of emergency declared by the federal government over violence in the Amhara region. Tesfaye Belige, the government's chief whip, also says that he has become necessary to stop the situation. Clashes between members of the Ethiopian army and a local militia, known as Fano, erupted earlier this month in towns and cities across Amhara after months of tensions. On Monday this week, an airstrike killed at least 26 people in Ethiopia's embattled Amhara region. The United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali has expedited its withdrawal from Ber in Timbuktu region by 1 day due to a deteriorating security situation in the area, including risks to the safety and the security of UN personnel. Speaking to reporters, UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric said the mission reported 2 attacks on Sunday on a convoy carrying personnel and equipment from the base at Ber to Timbuktu, resulting in 4 Burkinabe peacekeepers suffering injuries. Unfortunately, they are not life-threatening injuries.
I'll start off with an update on Mali, where our peacekeeping colleagues are telling us that they are expediting their withdrawal from Ber in the Timbuktu region by 1 day due to a deteriorating security situation in the area, including risks to the safety and security of UN personnel. The national authorities were promptly informed. The mission reported 2 attacks yesterday on a convoy carrying personnel and equipment from the base at Ber to Timbuktu, resulting in 4 Burkinabese peacekeepers suffering injuries. Fortunately, those are not life-threatening. We condemn the attacks and call on parties to ensure safe movement for peacekeepers throughout the withdrawal period as the mission endeavors to hand over bases and previously mandated responsibilities to the Malian authorities, the UN country team, and the UN Office for West Africa and the Sahel. As a rule, the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali can only transfer its facilities to the Malian state. In this context, the UN is in discussions with the Malian authorities on a draft agreement that will govern the transfer of UN peacekeeping camps. In parallel, whenever the UN peacekeepers depart a camp, the designated representative of the Malian authorities is requested to attest to the state of the camp and the facilities, and also to confirm that we have fulfilled our environmental obligations.
And let's talk health matters now. It's no news that the World Health Organization, the WHO, declared an end to COVID-19 as a global health emergency. However, it indicated that it still remains a global threat. Briefing journalists in Geneva, the Director General of the World Health Organization, Tedros Ghebreyesus, noted that the number of cases has continued to lessen remarkably.
I declared an end to COVID-19 as a global health emergency, although I said that it remains a global health threat. Since then, the number of reported cases, hospitalizations, and deaths globally has continued to decline. However, the number of countries reporting data to WHO has also declined significantly. In the past month, only 25% of countries and territories have reported COVID-19 deaths to WHO, and only 11% have reported hospitalizations and ICU admissions. There is no question that the risk of severe disease and death is vastly lower than it was a year ago, thanks to increasing population immunity from vaccination, infection, or both, and from early diagnosis with better clinical care. Despite these improvements, WHO continues to assess the risk of COVID-19 to global public as high. The virus continues to circulate in all countries, continues to kill, and it continues to change. WHO is currently tracking several variants, including EG.5, for which we are publishing a risk evaluation today. The risk remains of a more dangerous variant emerging that could cause a sudden increase in cases and deaths.
Let's go now to Mozambique to meet a talented photographer whose goal is to put the history of the country in the spotlight. The 43-year-old contemporary African photography winner fell in love with the camera at a young age and has started to document stories about Africa and its history. Find out about who she is in this next report.
Mozambican photographer whose contemporary artwork gained her a Contemporary African Photography Prize is using the win to highlight the country's colonial past through her family history. While trying to show how she finds inspiration for her photography, 43-year-old Yasmin Ford weaves through the capital, Maputo, recollecting memories about her family by taking pictures of buildings and streets that reminds her how her father, a Portuguese soldier, and her mother, a local woman, met during the height of the Portuguese occupation in Mozambique.
So this is one of the places that appears in my work. It is where my father grew up and did his military training. They used to be in this square for the military parade, singing.
In her latest work, titled This is a Story About My Family, which awarded her the international prize, Ford uses collagen to juxtapose the past and the present, starting with her Portuguese father, then layering her face on top of his to show facial resemblance.
In this work, I tell a story about my father, a Portuguese soldier that comes to Mozambique with his mom and dad and lived here many years and went to the army. That's why we have a picture of him in the army suit. He lived in town. That's why we have the buildings on his face.
The aim of her work is to dissect the effects of colonialism and migration on Africans.
I think she's a very interesting photographer, doing an excellent work portraying diverse aspects of Mozambican culture.
With the international recognition, Ford is hoping to travel her work all over the world and also exhibit into bigger galleries and be known for documenting African people and their history.
We'll always hold on to our history and our heritage. And that's it on Network Africa for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Anne Nwawadu. Enjoy the rest of the week.